David McRaney is a science journalist. He is an author. In fact, he's got several books, including the book You Are Not So Smart, which is titled after his site and podcast, which I'd heard about years ago. And I just love the title, and I love the fact that he's sort of encouraging critical thought. He's got another book from several years back called You Are Now Less Dumb, and his latest, How Minds Change. David McRaney, thanks for coming, man.
I'm happy to be here. And as I said before we started rolling, for some reason, our fan bases are sure that we are doppelgangers, perhaps even that we're doing like some sort of trick where we're playing the game where one of us is doing one. We're the same person, basically.
We were both created in the Wuhan lab, and
yes.
Now we infect the culture. So that's what
that is not how I would have put it, but I appreciate that you did. What I do, I just want everyone to know, I do feel some sort of strange heat forming in the room. I can't tell the source. I think we may be forming some weird black hole thing. So we're keeping up with it, is what I'm saying. We're keeping up with it. I've contacted the Large Hadron Collider people and seeing what they can do. Anyway, happy to meet you. I've wanted to meet you for a long time too. I know we both know Anthony Manabosco, a couple, and other people all throughout this world.
Yeah.
It's odd that we never have actually met. So this is really cool.
Well, you mentioned the Large Hadron Collider. I got to go there for a second. Some people were terrified that once it was turned on, we would destroy the known universe. Mm-hmm. And I know they have reignited the machine or, turned it back on. We're still here. But it's weird to see people who have such a distrust of us tampering with the things that may be the domain of God. Is that how you'd put it, David?
Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up in the Deep South with a conspiratorially minded father, a Vietnam vet, who was very distrustful of institutions, military, industrial, and scientific, and medical, and so on. And in working on How Minds Change, I've spent time with 9/11 truthers and flat earthers and so on. And I went to, it's not in the book, but because COVID made that chapter seem like, why are you talking about this particular kind of anti-vaxxer? But I went to an anti-vaxxer convention with Andrew Wakefield was at. And in every one of those communities, it's the same underlying motivation, which is I do not trust either authority in general, or I do not trust a very specific kind of authority that's trying to take away my agency, put weird stuff inside me. There may be some Illuminati stuff taking place. So yeah, I understand why the same fears would come up when, like, are you trying to make little black holes? That doesn't seem okay. Yeah. And even among the very progressive, liberally minded, not think they're like that kind of people, I see a lot of that's what put us on the dark timeline conversations. And maybe by flipping it back on, we're all back on the right timeline again.
Let's talk about cynicism. I'm struggling with it in my own life right now. I'm an example of somebody who had some pretty awful ideas and was able to change his mind. And I go through this line item that my audience is already familiar with, whether it's religiously or politically. In terms of my values, I've changed my mind, but I'm also just fighting this. We're up against it. The avalanche of horrible ideas. There's no way to defeat it. I feel like I'm talking to brick walls. The brick wall phenomenon. Are you feeling that? I mean, certainly
I used to
gotten into those exchanges, right?
I used to I did not intend for How Minds Change to follow this arc, but it's in there of me changing my mind in the direction of optimism from cynicism. And I no longer see things that way. I don't see people as unreachable, unapproachable. I don't think any issue is intractable, that things aren't going to change. I do understand the frustration though, and I feel it too. But I try to say in the book that I feel like the frustration should be directed at the person who is beating the brick wall, not the brick wall itself. Like I liken it to trying to reach the moon with a ladder, and when you fail, assuming that the moon is unreachable, that really you need different tools, different methods. And the conversational dynamics we often get into with people who see things differently than us, or have strange beliefs, or they're incorrect, or they have moral, ethical, political views that cause harm and all that kind of thing. We often engage people in the way that guarantees that it will turn out poorly, or that they will become more entrenched after the conversation. And you do that enough and you start believing, well, I should never do that again. So I used to be exactly where you're at in those ways. I don't know how far along you are in this cynicism, but
I mean, I really am an optimist. I mean, in my mind, I know it's possible, and I've changed my tack because I used to be what you were talking about. I'd walk in and grab somebody by the shoulders and say, "What's wrong with you?" I remember one conversation that I would love to have. I'd like an undo button on it. Somebody going through a tremendous health problem, had multiple sclerosis, and I went in and said, why do you think God wants you to have MS? Right. I thought I was making a great point. And this person immediately felt insulted and attacked and doubled down and was emotionally just screwed up. And it cost us a part of our relationship just because I was being a total asshole. I mean, there's a way to have that conversation, right? The problem of needless suffering. Why aren't prayers answered? I mean, these are all meritorious conversations, but the way I approached it actually guaranteed failure, right?
Yeah, I've done that a million times myself. And I get it. There are many issues, like right now as we're recording this, there are things that have bubbled up it feels in some ways wrong to engage someone with compassion and curiosity and transparency on an issue that you are either it threatens your life or someone you love. They're full of hate. They are, trying to create a world that you do not want to live in or maintain one. I understand feeling like, why should I offer them anything? I should grab them by the lapels. I get that. And I understand. I think that you're totally right to feel these feelings. It's just that if you want to change their mind, it's not going to work. And if they're dead set on not allowing you to create a good faith environment for which you could have that kind of conversation, like that's something you have to work on. And it's a lot of work to put someone in a frame where they will speak to you in that way. And I understand not wanting to put in the work to put them in the good faith frame, because you can't even start the conversation until you put that work in. And for some people, that's going to take months of rapport building especially if you have to repair an old relationship, maybe that has gone off the rails, or you're just meeting with someone who's like actually full of hate, anger, and prejudice. I get that completely. Some of the techniques I talk about in the book, I would say if that's where you're at, like I talk about, like in the terms of keeping it wind and rain based themed. Like I think of it as like trying to get people to evacuate before a hurricane. For every extremely obstinate holdout, you could probably reach 5 people who would see what you're trying to do. And if you're looking for impact on a large scale, it's probably best to work on the least resistant and let their numbers build so they can impact the next least resistant. But one-on-one, yeah, there are ways that you can engage with people to try to avoid these situations. And I start the book by talking about how I even got on this track. I was doing a lecture and someone came up to me and said, I have a father who's fallen into a conspiracy theory. What can I do about it? And I just told them, nothing. You can't do anything about it. I was still in that you are not so smart kind of frame where I was saying, I was very descriptive. I was avoiding anything prescriptive. And I felt like I was locking my keys in my car when I said that. I didn't feel it really all the way. And at that same time, all the norms and attitudes about same-sex marriage and LGBTQ issues in America were changing very rapidly. And I wanted to chase those two things down and try to understand, okay, there probably is a way to change minds, or at least I don't understand how minds change in general. And I should go about changing that. So I changed my own mind, writing a book about how minds change.
Well, we talk about debates sometimes. I was going on a journey. I was sort of opening my mind and heart. I stumbled upon an online debate, which changed my life. Right? But I think
I don't know the story. If you're willing to tell me, I'd love to hear it.
Well, in a nutshell, and I don't bore my audience, but I was scrolling YouTube and I found Christopher Hitchens debating a rabbi in New York. And, I'm not Jewish, but I thought, well, certainly the rabbi's got a bead on the Bible, and this, the atheist. I was curious about Hitch, but I didn't know anything at the time. And after 90 minutes, I was just struck. I thought, this guy, the atheist, made better points. He actually made more sense. And so that spun me off into this journey of discovery. But, I as far as debates go, formal debates, informal debates, I'm struck by the fact that I wasn't on stage. I wasn't being attacked personally. I was sort of in this position of safety, right? I was off here in the periphery. Nobody saw me. Nobody heard me. I was anonymous, but I was able to sort of watch this exchange happen. And I'm convinced more and more that people do change their minds from a position where they don't feel attacked personally. Would you agree with that? I mean, safety is a big part of how we reach people, even ourselves, right?
It's the number one thing. Like so like all brains are resistant to change by default, because through the process of assimilation and accommodation, which is assimilating is making sense of the world based off what you already understand, and then accommodating is making room for something you didn't understand by expanding the range of your like abstraction space. You do that enough over the course of your life, it gets pretty dense and complicated, and your models are pretty robust, and the risk versus reward, like if you change your mind, you could become wrong, but if you don't change your mind, you might stay wrong. We tend to err on the side of, well, the model's what got me to where we're at so far. So you already have that baseline resistance that has to be overcome by, just enough counter attitudinal or counterfactual information to put you over a line, over a threshold. But that line gets higher and higher. The resistance gets stronger and stronger, depending on all the other motivations you have to maintain the model. And as Brooke Harrington, the great sociologist, told me, the equals MC square of social science is that the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And when the ship is going down, we'll put our reputations on the lifeboat and we'll gladly go to the bottom of the ocean. The belonging goals trump accuracy goals every single time. And if by any intonation, if you are suggesting, whether you're reading something or it's on television or it's in a conversation, if the suggestion is you will be shamed for changing your mind, if you risk ostracism, social costs, and so on, if you like in the communication, if you like suggest that to somebody, even if you don't intend to, that's going to cause the most resistance. And even just from like the tone of your approach, you can generate what they call reactance in therapeutic models, which is the sense that some stimulus is causing me to feel like my agency is under threat, my freedom is under threat. If you say, I think you should believe this or think this directly to a person, you should put this in your mind and take what you have in your mind out and replace it. Or so other people think you should do that. Then as they put it, the stimulus generates a motivational arousal to reduce the stimulus. What that means is they get pissed off and angry, and it happens. You have no choice. It just bubbles up inside you. This negative affect takes over, and you want to push away from the conversation or end it, and because the stimulus is the other person. All of that gets assuaged by addressing it directly, building rapport in the conversation early, generating this sense of trust with the other person. You're trying to create an environment that's like, if you go watch a movie with one of your friends and you're pretty sure you love it, and you get out and you can't wait to talk to them about it, and they say, I hate that movie. And you don't think, well, we can never talk to each other ever again, or I don't trust you anymore. What you end up doing is getting into one of these like shoulder to shoulder conversations where you're like, well, tell me what you didn't like about it. I'll tell you what I did like about it. And you kind of move each other a little bit. That can only happen in an environment of trust and safety. And you're totally right. Like the fact that you can watch on and be an argument taking place between two people, you don't have any of these pushback feelings. And there's even something called narrative transport in the literature, where this is why a lot of movies and books are so successful at generating change in the culture, because you are an onlooker and there's no urge to create counter arguments while you're watching the thing. You just let it happen passively, and you can allow the arguments to sit out there, and you can take something from it that if you were being told this, if you were being pushed in some way, you would push back, and the other person would push back harder, and you get into a loop of pushing, and you leave the opportunity to learn anything from each other.
Well, this brings up a troubling memory in my own life. I remember, because I love the film Office Space. Love it. Love that film. And so I'm telling someone this is one of the greatest things ever committed to film in the history of film. And we sit down and they just look at me like they did not engage, they did not enjoy, they did not get it. And it almost cost me a friendship. Like I almost said, look, I must expunge you from my life. You cannot appreciate the genius of Office Space. But it is funny, the things we take personally, if someone else doesn't jive with that, how much of those, you mentioned, I'll call them tribal reinforcers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, rejecting an idea, changing a mind also means there might be some punitive consequences. Our tribe may think we're nuts, or, they may judge us, or we might feel insecure in our social circle. So now we've got not only the punitive aspect of it, but maybe a sense of social superiority. I don't know. Talk to me about tribes, David.
Yeah, it's I there's some psychologists and scientists that don't like using the term tribal psychology. I totally get that. They prefer in-group, out-group affinity and things like that, but it's all the same thing. We're ultra social primates is what it comes down to. And we are very, very concerned with what other people think about us. And we are engaged in reputation management pretty much all the time. And if an issue becomes politicized, which is to say that it becomes how you think, feel, or believe regarding the issue becomes a signal to other members of your most trusted peers, it becomes either a badge of loyalty or a mark of shame to think and feel in a certain way. We feel that intuitively and we will behave accordingly. And it's astonishing that just about anything can fall into that space. It could be anything that's not yet politicized could be politicized. Like I could find the microphone you're using to be, I don't know, this is the people that I hang out with don't like that kind of microphone. We use this microphone. And the reason we use this microphone is blah, 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 right? We're all keenly aware of this, even though it is not something that always bubbles up into it's not always salient. It's not always articulated, but we're always aware of it. I think the most striking example recently would be mask wearing and getting vaccinated, which should be a neutral scientific topic, modulated by just your trust or distrust of authority. But it became politicized to the point that literally wearing a mask or not wearing a mask was a statement that I am in this group or not in this group, and people acted accordingly. And there are people who have on their deathbeds said, they were happy to have never been vaccinated. And if you were to ask the person what reasons they have to do that, this is where this really gets into the sort of where our Venn diagram overlaps, is that reasoning, psychologically speaking, is just coming up with reasons for what you think, feel, and believe. And the reasons will be plausible explanations for holding that position. And plausible means something that you intuit your most trusted peers would consider reasonable. And oftentimes the reasons we produce, they're just justifications. They're justifications for whatever. It's like you want a piece of chocolate cake and you're saying, well, the reason I'm eating the cake is because I didn't have anything for breakfast. Like you just want the cake. Like you just try to find a reasonable justification for it. When it comes to like vaccination, like I said, I went to a anti-vaxxer conference, and when you would ask, like, why do you oppose the vaccine? You would get all sorts of things that, all these different justifications and reasons for why you don't want to do it. But the real reason why people didn't want to get vaccinated, according to the literature, is that the idea that a government / medical thing, which you already distrust, takes a chemical which you do not understand, and they want to inject that foreign thing into the body of your child via a needle that's going to hurt them, and you have no say in it. That's the thing that's generating the negative attitude. The negative attitude sits there, and then you feel it without asking for it, and then you have to come up with a justification for why you feel that way that your peers would find reasonable. That is the sort of the processing chain, and you will find that through all sorts of stuff. Like people who are opposed to same-sex marriage, oftentimes they'd cite something in the Bible as why they were against it, but it was a cultural thing. Like their culture was against it, their upbringing was against it, their family was against it. And they were using the Bible as a justification for that thing. So the thing again there was social influence. It was the culture. So all throughout the book, I talk about all these different ways that people fall into these things, and flat earthers was like kind of the most neutral way to do it. That should be a neutral topic, right? Is the earth flat or is it round? But it's not a matter of evidence for someone who's in that community. It's a matter of community. It's a matter of, if I change my mind about this, all my friends go away. I already have to use a different dating app because I'm in the flat earther community. The idea of losing that is going to drive my behavior and my thinking much more than any evidence you're going to present. So it's a strong part of what we are as people, and we're all doing it at all times. Even people in the rationalist, humanist, atheist community are driven by these things as well, and those sort of things will trickle and flow all through all sorts of groups. What you have to do, and this is the last thing I'll say of this, just so we can just get another question in, or I'll talk forever.
No, take your time. It's all good.
Since accuracy goals will always supersede, since belonging goals almost always will supersede accuracy goals, a lot of the groups that have been able to get something out of being groups have found a way to get those two things to play nice with each other. So like a lot of scientific groups, the institutions, you gain reputation and status, and you avoid social costs by pursuing accuracy. You do it by vetting and having a hypothesis, gathering evidence, letting the chips fall where they may, tearing each other's stuff apart, updating your priors when you need to, and so on. Everybody still resists. They still act like human beings. They still do dumb stuff, but that's at least in there, as that's how I reach a level of reputation in this community. I see the same thing in lots of rationalist communities too. So whereas in the flat earther community, those two goals are not aligned anymore. Belonging is reached by avoiding accuracy in that world. So there's a way to get these two things to play nice, but in institutions that don't do a great job of that, oftentimes they end up with some very strange beliefs, values, and sort of positions that they want to move off of because of the social cost they may incur.
Talking here with David McRaney. He is a science journalist, author of the new book, How Minds Change. I want to talk about emotional appeal. I've become more and more convinced that if we're going to change the culture, one of the big tools we've got is going to be stories. I've seen the PhD types. They're in the lecture hall under the fluorescent lights, giving us bullet points on a PowerPoint. I just don't think that's how we change the world. I don't think that's how we change minds. When we talk about the emotional appeal, because, in the atheist movement or the skeptical rationalist culture, I've heard some people, they're very distrustful of emotion. Maybe they've been manipulated by the church or by someone else in an untoward way. But we are, we're not Vulcans, as logical as we would like to be. We are also creatures of all the senses, including the heart. You see utility in going for the heartstrings? Can we be logical and be feely at the same time?
I don't think you can be logical without being feely. Certainty is an emotion. The feeling that I am confident or not confident, and therefore my level of certainty leads me to feel that this is true or false. That's all an emotional thing that's taking place. It's like bumping your knee against a table and feeling pain. It happens to you internally. To pull from, if anyone wants to read more into this, you could. Robert Burton has a great book on being certain, and he helped with my book. The scientific construction that is to believe or doubt is the result of neurons and associative networks delivering the emergent sensation of confidence or the lack thereof. They weight that feeling, and you can feel that when you say, "How strongly do you believe this?" on a scale from 0 to 10. Like when you put a number on it, it's not 0 or 10. It's not just a binary fact for you or a belief. You have a feeling of certainty about the thing. So. And then there's also the work of Antonio Damasio, who's Descartes' era, and he's got a lot of books about this, about how people who've had the portions of their brain, if there's damage to the portion of the brain that generate our strong emotional responses, so that somebody has a very low emotional affect, more like a Vulcan, they find it almost impossible to make very simple decisions, like, would you like to use this red pen or this blue pen to sign this document? That becomes like an hour worth of internal logic. Like, well, let me create a nested tree of all the reasons this would be good or bad, and let me compare it to the other tree. But never mind trying to go pick out a cereal of the cereal aisle. That's never going to happen. You don't have enough cognitive bandwidth to make that level of logic, that the kind of logical appeal to something. So emotions are inseparable from the process. And when we are interacting with things that are ambiguous or uncertain, the way we disambiguate and arrive at certainty is to weight things through emotional responses and to pull on our priors and all of our attitudes. It's really important whenever you're talking about a particular issue to not let attitudes be absent from the conversation. Like if I ask you if do you think the president's a good president? And you say, if you say the president, yes, I think the president's a good president. That can seem like you're expressing a belief, but you're really expressing an attitude, a valenced emotional evaluation going from positive to negative. And then you can have beliefs that inform that attitude. And you can also have your attitudes can then also back propagate to your beliefs. But the whole thing is based off an emotional response. And that's also true for anything we believe is true or false. Like that feeling of certainty is a feeling. And we're emotional. And so appeals to emotion they're ethical, they're proper, they're acknowledging the humanity of the other person. And you can't take that out of the conversation if you expect to get anything out of it.
Well, if I can jump in quickly though, mm-hmm. How do we manage that? Because people fall in love with an idea. A great example I like to use, Mother Teresa. You go to somebody and you're like, well, Mother Teresa was actually not a good person and did a tremendous amount of harm and was an extremely troubled person at the very least. We don't think she was a saint. And people who know nothing about Mother Teresa, except she was a nun born in Calcutta, she's Catholic, that's all they know. They know nothing specific about her except they fell in love with the idea that she was a saintly old woman. They'll just flip out. I mean, they're not interested in discussion. The defense modes kick in and they are saying, they actually attack the messenger. Who would ever say anything untoward about Mother Teresa? So how do we manage that? Because emotion so often, us falling in love with ideas, we're all guilty. How do we get around that?
Well, that is a great example of generating reactance. If you were to approach a person who loves Mother Teresa and you're thinking, I would like them to not love Mother Teresa, the first thing I would ask is, why do you want to do that? Like, what is your motivation? Let's start with let's have a step zero in any stepwise process. What is it that you're hoping to do here? What is driving your desire to engage in that dynamic? And let's get as honest with yourself as possible about it. Are you trying to reduce some sort of harm? Are you interested in that person having very accurate beliefs? Is this something about you want the world to be all fact-based or do you have something against religion? What is your personal motivation here? Get very honest with yourself first. And then approach the other person with that same sort of curiosity. What is motivating their desire to hold that position? What is driving that attitude they currently hold? It probably has very little to do with facts about Mother Teresa. Most likely they had an attitude, a value, a social structure that all generated the motivation to look at all the evidence available in the world and cherry pick it for things that paint Mother Teresa in a positive light. And that is the process that you're trying to interact with. If you're going to engage with them in a way where you want to avoid conflict, but you want to generate this ability for them to hold a different perspective or entertain other perspectives. And you have to be interested in their process of arriving at certainty more than the actual certainty itself. If you engage at the level of just facts, or you engage at just the level of, here's some things that I know about Mother Teresa that might change your mind. Never going to work. And we've all experienced this. When people have these battles where they dump evidence on top of each other, unless you're in a good faith environment, you're already in that state of mind where you want to do that, you're open to it, that usually generates resistance. And the better way to go about it, and this is something that Anthony Magnabosco talks about, there's all these different methods that talk about the book. There's street epistemology, there's deep canvassing, smart politics, motivational interviewing, and so on. In the case of something that's strongly attitude-based like that, I would recommend using deep canvassing. And deep canvassing is very close to motivational interviewing. And you open by establishing trust and rapport. You say, I'm interested in how you feel about this issue. I'm interested in what your thoughts are on it. I'd like to investigate that with you. Be open to talking to it and just ask you some questions. I want to hear your perspective. Get them in that frame. Avoid reactance. and then ask for a number scale instead of going straight in with the examples that you think might change their mind. Like on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 or 1 to 100, how do you feel about Mother Teresa? 10 being absolute incredible human being and 0 being, oh my, that's someone who should be, I wish they'd gone to jail. When they give you the number, you want to work from that. If they give you a 10 or a 0, they're in what they call pre-contemplation, which means you have to back up a little bit so that you can get them into a frame where they're willing to not think in binaries. But most people don't do that. And then once they give you a number, you just ask, why does that number feel right to you? And start having that conversation. That conversation steps out of that binary true, false, good, bad place. And you get into a, what's generating these emotions? What's generating this feeling that I have? Where's it all coming from? And if you are interested in if you wanted to introduce counter arguments into that dynamic, you can't copy paste them out of your mind into theirs. They need to generate those counter arguments on their own. And you can encourage that by holding space and sort of guiding them through metacognition. If they say they're at a 8 about Mother Teresa, ask, why not a 9? Why not a 10? And what they must say to explain that will be counter arguments away from the extreme. And then you keep the conversation in that space and be open to having multiple conversations like that. Then at some point you can say, well, I hold a different position about Mother Teresa, and I'm really interested in how can we disagree about that? Notice that you're not saying you should change your mind. You're saying, I'm wondering why we disagree. And when you say, I wonder why we disagree, the other person is open to hearing what you have to say. And then you can have that shoulder to shoulder dynamic again. We're both sort of exploring this mystery together of how could two people see this differently? And what is informing my position? What's informing your position? And why do we have those? Why did my process cherry pick the evidence and just take these out and yours took this out when there's a lot of evidence to look at and it seems like it's not balanced? Do you have much more success with that approach than you would from the other approach?
Do you get into, in your own show, I'm guessing you get into solipsism, right? I guess we should define that for those who are sort of just tapping their toe into the waters. How do we know things beyond our own mind? How, what our perception versus reality? Or what if we're just a brain in a vat? I've heard all these, the philosophers and even the theologians, thank you, get into that. You want to talk solipsism, define it and kind of how you approach it?
I don't get into the persuasion stuff and how minds change until page 200, because I spend so much of the book in that space you're talking about, that dangerous space where you start going, oh no, how do we know anything? What is real? What is not? Is subjective reality just a virtual landscape of the brain? And outside of this, who knows what's going on? That's a real dangerous space because you very quickly get the urge to go walk in the woods and just make canoes.
It becomes this sort of, infinite regress where I become overwhelmed and then check out, which is probably common, right?
Yeah, of course. And there's a reason why there are philosophy texts. There's a reason why if you read enough philosophy, you start wondering if a chair is even a chair anymore. It's a very dangerous place to go. And in a book that I wanted to get to very particular ideas, I felt myself sinking deeper and deeper into that and reading all these, epistemology textbooks and everything. The way I approach in the book, I really wanted there to be something on the ground for the reader. Because this book, unlike my other stuff, is very much on the ground. You're with me as I'm talking to people and exploring it. I was given the great gift in this space of the dress, which is my favorite topic when we get to solipsism. It's my favorite thing in the world to get into this topic without having to beg people to read old philosophical things. Are you cool with talking about the dress for a bit?
Yeah, please do.
Cool. So I met the neuroscientists at NYU who wanted to understand what was up with that whole dress thing that went viral in 2015.
Well, describe the thing, the phenomenon that happened on the internet. So, because there may be some who weren't privy to it.
Sure. In 2015, there was this image that went around the internet. And when I say went around, it was the most went around anything had ever done at this point on the internet. It was being shared so much that Twitter stopped working for a little while. It wouldn't load on people's phones. It was the the most hashtag thing that ever been hashtagged at that point. Celebrities were talking about it, local news, like in the small towns, but in their segments. But so here's something else that's happening. The dress. What do you see, Bobby? And they're like it's white and gold to me. And like, are you crazy? It's impossible. So the reason it went viral, and the Washington Post at the time, by the way, they even wrote, this is the argument that finally broke the internet, which is really seems quaint now that we've had plenty of internet arguments since then that have broken it over and over. Some people, when they look at the image, the dress is black and blue. Some people, when they look at the image, it's white and gold. And whatever you see, that's just what you see. You have no choice in the matter. It is how you see it. And if it wasn't for the fact that social media is social, you might never know that other people see it differently. And when you do discover that other people see it differently, you start entering into that, I better go in the woods and make canoes place, because you get introduced to the concept that subjective realities can differ. And it's for some people it was the first time they'd ever experienced that. And for others, it was like, how could that, what's going on in the brain? And in the book, I talk about all sorts of things related to this. All the old, like Thomas Nagel, what is it like to be a bat, and everything about consensus realities, and everything from the all the philosophical frameworks, and even things from Black Mirror and the Matrix, and everything that goes into subjective versus objective reality. Now that we all have VR headsets, there's a little bit more buy-in to these concepts. But with the dress, what was happening, the scientists at NYU, what they figured out was the image is overexposed. But it depends on your experiences with overexposure up into that moment, how you will interpret that overexposure. There's something in vision science called subtracting the luminant. So our brains are always doing this. When things are overexposed, we always subtract the luminant a little bit to try to see what's actually there. It's a lie your brain tells you to try to help you see the truth that ought to be. And that's how you can understand. That's how you can see a sweater in a closet and know what color it is, even if the closet's dark. Or in a very overexposed bright summer day, you can see the color of cars and things like that. Your brain's always messing with the illumination. This image was ambiguous. It was as to what the overexposure was. It could be it's a poorly taken image on a poor phone and a cloudy day and a weird angle, and the overexposure could be sunlight or it could be artificial light. And the more experiences you've had in life where things have been overexposed in natural light, in sunlight, the more you will assume that this is overexposed in sunlight, and you'll subtract things from the blue part of the spectrum, leaving behind a white and gold, a gold and yellow dress. People who have spent more time in artificial light, which is mostly yellow, they will subtract the yellow luminant, giving you a black and blue dress. So your priors, the priors you bring to the situation, in this case, visual priors, perceptual priors, are what determines how you will disambiguate the ambiguous. And this is something that I use to get into the idea that we were talking about here, this subjective reality solipsism thing, which is, that's true for every single thing that we encounter in life. All the experiences we've had thus far, all the priors we bring to the situation. When something is uncertain or ambiguous, we will disambiguate it via those priors. And there's a model that they use in that the neuroscientists who studied the dress is called SURFPAD. And I love this this framing. Substantial uncertainty in the presence of ramified or forked prior assumptions will lead to substantial disagreement. Ramified meaning branching, which just means there's a line, and above that line is all the things going on in your brain, all the nature, nurture, and experiences you've had thus far. And when you encounter something ambiguous, you will disambiguate it through those things. And if your disambiguation is different from somebody else, you will arrive at a completely different subjective reality from them, and you might disagree a whole lot. And it relates to everything we've talked about so far, whereas you can imagine people looking at the dress and saying, it's this color. No, it's this color. And if you wanted to get into a debate about which color it is, a debate in which one person ends up being the winner or the loser, right or wrong, you will get nothing out of that, because neither person's right, neither person is wrong. It's a matter of trying to investigate, why do you see it differently? And unless you get into that frame, you'll never even think about approaching it from the perspective of, oh, this must be something to do with neurons and retinas and visual priors, all that would be left off the table if you stay in that debate frame. So that's how I get into that topic. And that's something I think is a really useful way, a very neutral way to talk about these topics.
No, I want to go into the woods and make canoes. It's just overwhelming. All right. So I'm reminded I'll call it a political cartoon. It shows these two religious armies. It's a holy war. They're on the battlefield and they're both holding up this flag with the same image, which I think you called it the duck rabbit or the rabbit duck or whatever. Yeah. But it's that image where, depending on how you look at it, it could look like a duck with the duck bill. Or if you look at it a little bit differently, the duck bill actually looks like rabbit ears and you've got a bunny. And one of the generals says, there can be no peace unless their duck god is defeated by our rabbit god. And I think there's a really good message underneath this political cartoon about how we often war with each other over perceptions. And I don't know if you've seen the cartoon or have an opinion about, the duck rabbit or what do you call it? Rabbit duck? What do you call it?
I call it the duck rabbit. There's it's in the book. It's like I have it. Yeah, I had to go find the actual image and to put all the proper citations in there. And there's like a Wittgenstein quote in the book about we don't find the process of seeing mysterious enough. The duck rabbit, also, full disclosure, I wanted all the chapter heads to be the duck rabbit, the little image you see after the number. And my editor was like, I know you love this thing so much, but it does not look cool it doesn't look as cool as you think it looks. And instead, we use this 3-piece cog instead, which actually was influenced by Anthony Magnabosco. I have his puzzle piece right here.
Oh, he's a brother. He's good people.
So when he has conversations using street epistemology, at the end of it, you get one of these puzzle pieces. If you get 3, it makes a circle. The circle of puzzle pieces is the actual image that's at the chapter heads instead of the duck rabbit. Cool. The duck rabbit is a interpersonal bistable perceptual illusion, as they call it. It just means that every brain disambiguates that as to one and the other, and then bounces back and forth between the two. It's perfectly ambiguous. So it could be one, it could be the other, and we disambiguate it and we go, oh, it could be this, could be that. What makes it different from the dress is that every brain will disambiguate the duck rabbit, and also there's the vase and all these other things that are like that. You can see it as a silhouette, so you can see it as a vase. Every brain settles on one, then the other, back and forth. With the dress and other things, which are intrapersonal bistable illusions, you settle on only one or the other. And it could be interpreted either way, but brains settle on only one or the other. And that's what generates this powerful disagreement because of something called naive realism. I don't know if you talk about this much on the show, but naive realism, the great Lee Ross, who I was able to interview before he passed away, the psychologist who spoke mostly about that. Naive realism is until you read too many philosophy books or had too many bong rip conversations in a dorm room, you may not be aware that reality is not a one-to-one replica that you experience in here. It's just a representation. It's a virtual landscape that the mind generates. Until you are aware of that, you are in a state of naive realism where you assume that your eyes are cameras and your memories are video recordings, and that what you see, think, and feel is exactly how reality really, really is. And there's the concept that there could be parts of the color spectrum you can't see and so on. But that concept can be expanded to anything. There are all sorts of other aspects of our cognition that we still have a bit of naive realism about. We feel like because we're feeling it and thinking it, that it must be accurate in some way. And it takes a lot of intellectual humility to get out of that frame. The duck rabbit's one way to go about it, but the dress is a higher order version of it, because like you said, in that war, it's with the banners, I'd put the dress on there more likely, because I remember Pascal Wallish, the neuroscientist, said it is not inconceivable that people could form political camps around one of these two interpretations. Weirder things have happened in history. And oftentimes cultures do form from just that little bit of grit that makes a cultural pearl of one particular interpretation of an outcome. One of the oldest studies in psychology is called They Saw a Game. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It was a football game between two opposing universities, and there were a lot of infractions, and they would show people a video reel of the game, and they would ask them to mark down who caused the most injury, and of course people would pick the team that was on their team would be the one that was in the right, the other team was in the wrong, even though they were both watching the exact same film. It could be played over and over again. We see this consistently all throughout everything. Right now with the trials that are taking place in Congress, and this could be evergreen, by the way, because anytime anybody listens to this, I bet there's somebody on trial in front of Congress, and the interpretation is, if you are in favor of one side or the other, you will interpret everything you're seeing as evidence that my side is right. And if you're not, you'll see all the evidence as total justification for how you feel, that it's evidence that shows that your side is wrong and my side is right, no matter what side you're on. It is a function of how we make sense of the world that takes a lot of effort to overcome. I don't know if I'm even answering your question. I'm just like talking about this.
No, I mean, I get it. I mean, this is obviously a little bit of a deeper dive than maybe I want to make sure I'm I don't know. I think what's going on in my brain as you're talking is, what if we're talking about something that is not designed to be purposefully ambiguous, the duck rabbit, right? What if there is something that we know is true, or we can know with an extreme amount of certainty that is true, and something then that is untrue, whether it's rigged election or whether it's a theocratic religion or whatever. You got two people who see two totally different things, but I mean, there shouldn't be that much ambiguity. How do we approach that?
It's you have to, the same methods we talked about earlier will work, but you have to, it can never go from I'm going to copy paste my interpretation into your head. I'm not going to, the facts that make sense to me are going to be interpreted through all these priors that I have when I'm bringing to the table. And if I just try to take those facts and dump them onto another person, they're going to interpret them their way. And it's not going to cause much movement. In fact, it can cause backfire where they'll become even more entrenched. This is something that the CDC experienced over and over again. They did a lot of research into trying to influence people to get the MMR vaccine. And they tried these 4 big approaches. One was give them tons of facts. One was give them tons of testimonials from scientists and doctors. Another was to watch this video of a child who is in pain with a measles outbreak. They tried all these different approaches, and what they kept getting back was the backfire effect, where they would watch it and they'd say, okay, I have updated my beliefs on this matter. Things I thought were true are now not true. Thank you very much. But my intention to vaccinate is even stronger. I do very much will never vaccinate my children. Thank you very much for giving me all this new information. In the book, I talk about something called the Why We Fight, which was in World War II. They created these films. The United States created these films to try to squash all these rumors and misinformation that were coming up about the war. They wanted people who were about to go to war to know that how big the German military was, how long the war was going to last, how much the RAF had put into the fighting, and so on. And it was this attitude they were trying to persuade them. They wanted to let them know this is going to be tough, not easy. But they found that attitudes changed only about 1% of change in people's attitudes after watching the films. However, all of their fact-based claims got updated. Like if they did address anything that was a fact they wanted to say that's not true or is true, people updated very readily. Their attitudes didn't change. So when it comes to something like these issues that you brought up earlier, like a stolen election, for example, bringing facts to that fight are more likely than not going to entrench the other person instead of getting them to update, because what's actually happening in their mind is they have a social identity, an attitude, a value, all these emotional components, these things that are affecting how they feel. And those are what are driving their cherry picking of all the evidence to arrive at certainty about some things and skepticism about others. And they're going to do the exact same thing no matter what you throw at them. So the only useful debate you could have with them is using what they call technique rebuttal, not topic rebuttal. Topic rebuttal is that good faith behind a lectern in front of an audience kind of debate, which is totally great in an environment where we can encourage that. It's a great thing. Logic, propositions, great. But when it comes to things where people are arriving at it thanks to very strong emotional components, especially when it comes to politics, where they're thinking about in-group and out-group status, you have to go through technique rebuttal, which is getting the person to process, go backwards through their processing chain and understand what are their motivations for arriving at it. And then in that, generating cognitive dissonance. With deep canvassing, what they often do is they have people, they ask them where they first hear about the issue. They ask them about examples of the issue, and then they get the person on their own to generate counter examples from their own life experiences, or to come up with propositions that seem to be in conflict with the ones they're putting forth. And they let that cognitive dissonance set inside the other person so that they want to resolve it. And then by not, by being a non-judgmental listener, you can encourage the other person to resolve that dissonance more in the direction of change. It's as simple as asking questions. It really comes down to asking the questions in a particular order. So with something very specific like the insurrection, the idea that the election was stolen, you could ask questions in a certain way that will allow a person to arrive at a level of cognitive dissonance that they will then want to resolve. So it's much more likely to generate change in that way. So long story short of this, my shorter version is the fact-based approach is going to almost always generate reactance, and that reactance will lead to entrenchment. I know I hate it as much as everybody else. It feels like the facts should just speak for themselves, but unfortunately, they have never spoken for themselves. There's always some attitude that's speaking on behalf of those facts, and it's determining whether or not you are skeptical. You're selectively skeptical based off the attitudes you bring to the issue.
I know in my own life, it was when I was made uncomfortable or when I felt uncomfortable that I started to finally explore, but it was different. I mean, I didn't feel attacked. I just felt uncomfortable. I don't know if that makes any sense. As we get close to a close here, and I'm going to pinball everybody over to the book because it's awesome. I need an anecdote, right? If we're going to change the world through stories, can you give me like an example of somebody that you encountered who changed their mind on a critical issue? You got something?
Yeah. There's one of my favorite stories in the book. And also I wish I had heard your story. I want to hear your story more, by the way. I'm interested in how you slowly arrived at your, it may be similar to what I'm about to share, but I'm interested in
well, I mean, the short version was, I was an idiot and somebody grabbed me by the shoulders and no, I'm just kidding. No, it was a long journey for me, longer than, I'm a little embarrassed as to how long it took, but
do you remember the earliest moments in which you felt a bit of,
Yeah. I mean, it was in the late 90s. I think we were sort of giving these religious platitudes in the wake of a tragedy. And I was, for the first time, cognizant of the fact that we were kind of creating a happy ending that didn't really make any sense. I was like, this is a messy, nasty story. Mm-hmm. And so what we are doing is we're taking our brush and we're painting a silver lining around it. But we are creating that. And it was the first time I remember becoming really aware that, maybe a lot of this is our doing. Maybe we're trying to, this is part of our way of dealing through the hardships of life and creating purpose. I didn't frame it that way, but in retrospect, that was what was going on. And then it was just like a death by 1,000 cuts after that.
I love that you shared that with me. That is identical to every story that I tell in the book. The people I spent time with at Westboro Baptist Church who had left. I spent time with people in conspiratorial communities who left, pseudo cults who left. There was a whole chapter in the book that we cut out about cult deprogramming, which, by the way, is pseudoscientific and isn't real, and nobody should ever do it. That was taken out. But the people I spent time with who had gotten out of cults, is the exact same process you described. The offboarding, the off ramp. I'll tell you a story from Charlie Veach, and I'll tell you how that's similar to the other stories. Charlie Veach was a 9/11 truther. There was a time when that was front and center of America's, and he's from the UK. It was front and center of conspiratorial thinking that 9/11 was an inside job, that there's all sorts of different models of what took place. Either the buildings were loaded with explosives, the planes were remote controlled. It could be sometimes it goes even deep enough that the people on board the planes were like old corpses. There's all sorts of ways to go about it. the overarching idea is that it wasn't a terrorist attack and that America knew it was coming and it was all on purpose and by design. Now, Charlie Veitch was one of those people who was really rising up through the ranks of that community. He had appeared on the Alex Jones program a few times and was palling it up with the reptilians, David Icke and those people. And he was sort of looking like he was going to become the next big dude in that world. He was going to be, he was very charismatic. He's a good looking guy. He's very good at public speaking. He probably was about to take the baton and move on in that conspiratorial world. He's making all these YouTube videos, getting millions of views, making a living at it. And the BBC, they did this thing called a conspiracy road trip. You can find it online if you look hard enough. It was a reality show where they took people in different conspiratorial communities, and then they took them and they did the thing everybody wishes they could do with somebody in those groups. They took them to the experts and had them meet them in person. In the case of the 9/11 truthers, they took them to ground zero. They had them fly in the flight simulators, commercial flight simulators. They had them actually fly a real airplane, take it off and land, a small prop driven one. They met the architects of the World Trade Center. They met demolitions experts. They met people who were at the Pentagon and helped in the cleanup of the Pentagon, who saw people they knew die at the Pentagon. They also met with widows and widowers in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where they spent time with people who actually lost loved ones in that crash. And Charlie was there for all of that. And he was there, the evidence was coming up that was starting to cause some doubts in his mind, especially with the buildings falling into their footprints. He had a demolition expert explain to him they did not fall on their footprints, that they blew outward. And then he said, well, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. What is that all about? And he's like, well, it doesn't have to. Like, it just, if it's a whole building, it's a gigantic building. And if the beam bends just a little bitty bit, the weight of the building will do the rest of the bending and it comes down. He had never seen any of this before. Never had it explained to him in that way by somebody like that. But still, he was hesitant. Still, he was resistant, but it was working on him a little bit. But when he met the widows and widowers, there was one particular woman, Alex Hoagland, who talked about losing her husband, and she cried and he hugged her. And she cried in his arms. And when he went back to the hotel room, he was like, wow, of all the things I've seen, that really is something. What do you guys think? And the other truthers that were with them, they were like, I know, where'd they find that actress? Like, she's pretty impressive. She could cry on command. And it made him feel that silver lining thing you were talking about. He was like, how could you treat another human being that way? He started to feel like my values that I have that are deeper than anything are being threatened by this reaction. I don't agree with it. He told me he thought that they were animals. They were disgusting fucking animals. And that's what he felt in that moment. And it was the crack that let in the light. It was the thing that led him to start thinking differently about everything. But all the other truthers, I explain in the book, that they saw all this evidence that he saw, and they became more entrenched. They sort of backfired. They doubled down. What made Charlie different was that he had also started spending time in another community called Truth Jews, which is a more ayahuasca, open your third eye kind of truther community. And it was also rising in their ranks. He was going to the meetups and he was speaking, and he was finding that his values were better affirmed in that group than the truther group. But it was the same thing, question authority, all that sort of thing. And so he had a foot in two different social worlds, and he had, because of that, a social safety net. He could risk ostracism for going against what they thought about certain things. And that was enough for him to cross some threshold and say on one of his YouTube videos that he had changed his mind. When that happened, he did suffer the thing that people fear the most as social primates. The truthers then went on to, I talk about all sorts of things they did to him. The worst thing was they were able to find pictures of his niece and nephew through a lot of weird Facebook investigating of other family members. And they photoshopped their faces on a child pornography and sent that to his mother. So they contacted his employer. They did everything they could to ruin his life. And all he did was, in a video in Times Square, say, I've listened to the evidence. I've changed my mind. I do not think 9/11 was an inside job. and they excommunicated him and they crushed him socially to the point where he had to move town, change his name, all this sort of stuff. So the thing we fear is the thing that's real. The community you're with, if you do go against the grain, may actually incur these huge social costs against you. And we're very aware of that. It's the same thing that Charlie went through, though, is the same thing that people at Westboro went through. They had the people I spoke to there, there were people who were non-judgmentally listening to them and offering them a hand from other social worlds and showing that their values could be affirmed in different communities. And that gives you permission to question things a little more deeply than you were before. And as the anomalies build up, you reach a place where it's like, I would like to perhaps be in a different community who looks at this differently. And the thing that must be there for you to off ramp is feeling like, oh, there is another group of people who see this in a different way that I could possibly hang out with. And that usually is the thing that is the thing that must be there. Without it, it's very difficult to off ramp from a conspiratorial group or a religious group that's got you held by its social clause.
Yeah, I get a lot of correspondence from people, and they have faced serious consequences by people who say, you must toe the line. It is an interesting look at how social reinforcers can keep people from tapping on the glass. And yet so many are tapping anyway. I think it's people who are courageously deciding, well, I'm going to figure this out. And I think, that's what we want in this world. The book is called How Minds Change. David, thanks I meant to keep you for like 40 minutes, and I think we've been well over an hour because you're just, you've got so much to say, and because I'm a selfish bastard who wants to stand on your shoulders to build good content. But I'm going to make sure and send everybody to your podcast and to your book. And I so appreciate you. This kind of thinking is helping people like me, and we want to change the world. We want to change minds. I think even though we don't like being wrong, I think we need to be honest enough to say, if I'm wrong, I need to be able to change my own mind. And I think books like this, conversations like this are the ticket. So Dave, you're much appreciated, brother. Thanks for being here.
Hey, very happy to be here. And to confuse people further, we even wore the same shirt today.
I'm doing some speaking tours. If I get sick or busy, I'm just going to call you and
this
you can go out.
This is a great arrangement. I'm glad we finally did this. So, thanks so much for having me. I do apologize for giving very long-winded answers, but I'm more obsessed with this than anything I've ever been. And it's an opportunity for me to continually proselytize about something. There's no zealot like a convert. So you know how it is.
Good stuff. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.